Take a look at this photo. Was this drum kit played by an amateur or a pro? How about this one? Okay, if you said the first kit was played by the pro and the second one was played by an amateur, you're right. So what clued you in? It's likely that the first thing you noticed was how the rack toms are set up. This is one of the top issues that I see with amateur kits that clues you in that this is not a professional player. It looks a bit unprofessional, but it's also going to get in your way musically as well. So let's talk about it. In an earlier video, I talked about your snare drum stand and how to set up your snare drum as part of your drum kit. You're probably going to want to check that video out before you watch this one because it's going to affect everything else that we talk about in this video and how you set up the rest of your drum kit. Okay, if you're short on time and you just want the punchline of this video, this is not good YouTuber technique, but here's the punchline. Your toms should be at the same height, at the same angle, and on the same plane. Nobody is going to get out the laser level, but they should definitely pass the eyeball test, and more importantly, they should pass the playability test. Before we talk about any adjustments to your drum kit, we need to talk about rebound. Rebound is essentially how your stick and the drum head are going to interact. The easiest way to think about it is to think about bouncing a basketball. If you bounce the ball straight down at the floor, it should bounce straight back up. But if you bounce the ball at an angle, it's going to continue in the direction that it was bounced at that angle. So essentially it's going to bounce the direction that it was thrown at the floor. Your sticks are going to do the exact same thing when you play your drums, with one major difference. You shouldn't be letting go of your stick. So with every stroke, if the stick bounces off in a way that you didn't intend, you have to compensate for that bounce or rebound with your next stroke. This can be a major problem. It's going to slow you down and it's going to make things harder to play. It's also going to affect the tone and resonance of the drums. You're going to get the very best sound that you can get if the stick and the drum head are essentially parallel at the moment of contact. So if you're playing at a steeper angle or an off angle, not only is it going to make the drum sound worse, you also may do damage to the heads because the stick is essentially cutting into the drum head rather than bouncing off. So the basic concept of setting up the entirety of your drum set is to get that best rebound angle possible. It's going to make your drums easier to play and get you the best sound possible. So everything else we're going to talk about in this video is centered around that concept. The first thing we want to talk about is the height of your toms. If the toms are on separate arms or separate tubes, you want to make sure that the angle adjustment mechanism is at the same height. If you have memory locks, you can use them to set this height or this distance and you never have to think about it again. You can also use your memory locks to set the distance between the toms, which we'll talk about in just a second. As much as possible, especially on your rack toms, you want playing the drums to feel like different areas of the same instrument rather than different instruments. So think about it like walking down the sidewalk. Every chunk of sidewalk should be on the same plane. It's super annoying when one is raised or at a different angle. And even with steps, you want them at the same angle and the same plane so that it's easier to walk up and down those steps. You're not having to worry about catching your toe or falling off the edge. The exact same thing is true with your drums. If they're all different parts of the same instrument and they're adjusted correctly, then moving around the drums to play a fill or a solo is going to feel more comfortable and you're not going to have to readjust or reset yourself every time you address a different drum. You are going to have to change heights between the snare and the toms, or maybe the rack toms and the floor tom, but we want to minimize that effect and the angle as much as possible. The next thing you want to consider is the angle of each tom, and these angles are going to be even more impactful than having the drums at the same height. Okay, this kind of comes from the concert percussion world, but if you imagine that you want to address each drum, you want to face that drum basically at a perpendicular angle and make your sticks parallel to the drum head. If the drums are at different angles, you're going to have to reset that angle of address with every single drum. Either that or you're going to put a lot of stress on different joints like maybe your shoulders. Just remember your junior high geometry class and try to put those drums on the same plane. Unfortunately, one thing that happens a lot is that an inexperienced player is not aware of this, the rebound and angle effect. And so they kind of just play whatever's there and play however they're going to play. And then they end up compensating for the off angle or the weird rebound without even knowing it. And down the road, that can have a huge impact on your playing and your habits. Also, one more thing, if the toms are angled too steeply, not only are you going to get the sticks digging into the head and not being parallel with the head, you're not going to be able to play shots on the rims of those toms. Now, I know playing shots on the toms is pretty rare, but if you use it as a guideline for being able to play those shots and play parallel to the head, you're usually going to get the drum itself at a really good angle. So when talking about tom distance, the drums should basically all be the same distance away from you. And remember that that distance is measured at the center of the drum or wherever your playing spot is, not necessarily the rims. Again, from the concert band world, if you've ever played timpani, you know that you want to just essentially be able to swivel in your chair without moving your sticks in or out, and the head of the mallet or the drumstick is going to be right over the place where you want to play the drum optimally. So the same thing is true with your drum set toms. Yes, there's going to be a little bit of moving in and out, but again, we want to minimize it as much as possible by making it so that as you move around your drum kit, particularly the toms, it's a circular motion, not an in and out motion with your drumsticks. The goal is to make it as simple and easy as possible and involve as few muscles as possible so that you can have the speed and the fluidity and the clarity that you want while you play. And one more thing with distance, you want the toms to be as close to each other as they reasonably can. Unless you've got a reason for having them further apart, you want them nice and close so that they're easy to play and you can move quickly from drum to drum. That said, you do want to leave at least some space between the drums so they don't rattle or buzz together when they're played. Let's troubleshoot a couple of common issues that you might run into when you're trying to set up your toms the way that I'm talking about. The first one is if you have the so-called common sizes of drum kit, you might have a 22-inch bass drum and then 12 and 13-inch rack toms, and those are huge. Honestly, they're huge. I'm 6'1", and having a 22-inch kick and a 12-inch first rack tom really makes the drum set very high, almost unreasonably high. And then if you're trying to get your toms in the position that I'm talking about, a lot of times that angle creates a very, very short distance between the bottom rim of the drum and the bass drum hoop. So you're actually knocking those toms into the top of the bass drum while you play, so that's not good. A couple of possible solutions. Number one, probably just the easiest one, is to move the toms off the bass drum. In the modern world, that kind of traditional 5-piece setup with 2 rack toms and 1 floor tom, while it's still very, very relevant, it's great to play, super musical, you may not want that, so very easily you're just going to remove that second rack tom and take the first rack tom and put it on a snare drum stand. Then you can angle it how you want and put it wherever you want in relation to the bass drum. Problem solved. Another solution, if you don't have a second snare drum stand or you don't want to put it on a snare drum stand, but you still want to remove that middle tom, is just to move it over. There's no reason that says it has to be over the middle of the bass drum, and for every inch that you move away from the center of the drum, that's another inch of vertical clearance you're going to get, giving you a little more room to put the drum exactly where you want it. Okay, this is the topic for another video. Maybe we'll talk about it very briefly, but an obvious and easy solution that might help you in other ways too is just to set your throne up higher. This is going to affect all the other parts of your drum set, but like I say, it's worth it. I don't know if you can hear how loud that is out there, but it is both fire season and we have a flight school in town, so there's a lot of flight activity and we live right in the flight path. Perfect for making YouTube videos. And having a recording studio. So while we're on the subject of thrones, I see a lot of drummers, especially younger drummers, that just simply sit too low. Your drum throne should feel higher than a standard chair for good reason. Here are a few rules that I follow when setting up my throne. First off, if you have to err on the side of sitting too high or too low, I choose sitting too high. And also make sure your posture is solid. You want to sit up nice and tall and straight, not tense, nice and relaxed. And again, nobody's going to get out of laser level, but you should not slouch while you play drums. While sitting at your throne, if you put your feet down on the pedals in playing position, then the angle between your hip and your knee should be a slight downward angle toward the floor, or at most a flat angle. This is going to make it so that the muscles in your hips and legs and even your abs don't have to work quite so hard to play those pedals. It's going to give you more power, strength, and speed. So if you're sitting low, try this out. Trust me. And then with your throne in that higher position, you still want your snare drum and your floor tom high enough that you can play shots and normal strokes on each of those drums without hitting your leg with any part of your arm or your sticks. If your arms can hit your legs while you play, then that snare drum or floor tom is probably too low. All right, if you've made it this far in the video, you probably have some great setup ideas floating around in your head as well, or things that you've used that have worked for you. So drop them in the comments. Okay, last, let's talk about floor toms. A great place to start for your floor tom is just simply to mirror whatever's going on with your snare drum. Put it at the same height, same angle, same distance away from your leg on the other side. This is another great place where memory locks can really help. A while back, I made an entire video just about memory locks. I'll try to put that link somewhere here. Click it. Just wherever it is, just click it. And the floor tom's distance away from you should be just about the same as your rack toms. Again, let's think about that timpani example, and as you swivel or just move down the toms, you shouldn't really have to move the sticks in or out too much to go from the center of your rack tom to the center of your floor tom. It should just be a natural arc. You can also use this exact same concept to set the heights and angles of your cymbals and their distance away from you, but we'll talk about that in another video. A pro tip for your floor tom is to locate the badge on the shell of the drum and point that toward the audience. That should put the legs in a position where two of the legs are away from you and one is kind of toward you. You can definitely adjust the rotation of the drum to make sure that that leg is out of your way. And one more thing, your floor tom leg should be angled to provide stability. On some kits, I've seen floor tom legs that just point straight down, and if that's your drum kit, you can ignore this part, but most of the legs are bent, and you want to point the bent part exactly away, perpendicular away from the shell of the drum to provide the most stability. Okay, now that you've got these concepts in your mind, I strongly recommend that you take your own drum kit and get them dialed in physically. It might take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort and thoughtfulness, and you may not get it right on the first try, but it's worth it to make your drum kit not only look professional, but to be as playable as it can and allow you to get the best sound out of it that you can. And while you're doing that, check out how your favorite drummers are setting up their kits. Look at as many professional setups as you can. It has been my experience that the higher the level of player, the more you're going to see these kinds of concepts in their setup. Over my career, I have helped to set up literally hundreds of drum sets using these exact same concepts. And I have found one thing, is that we get used to playing the kit how it is. And so if I come in or you take the time to change your drum kit, it's gonna feel really different, and you may absolutely hate it right at the beginning, but it's kind of like when you get a brand new pair of shoes. If you've got that old pair of shoes that's comfortably worn in, you get a brand new pair of shoes and it's gonna feel really awkward and uncomfortable, maybe even for a few days or a couple of weeks. But that doesn't mean that you go back to the old broken down pair of shoes. You keep wearing the new ones, and soon enough, your feet get used to it and it's gonna serve you better in the long run. I always challenge my students, once we've come in and set up their drum kit properly, play it that way for a minimum of 2 weeks and play every single day. If after 2 weeks you wanna go back and set it up the way you did before, you're more than welcome to, but I'm willing to bet you will not like the old setup. You're gonna like it the new way. As always, thanks for watching. I'm so glad that you decided to take your time to watch this video, and I really sincerely hope that it was helpful. If you haven't already, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel and clicking that like button. I'll see you in the next one.
All right.
Okay, let's go.
All right.
Did you get that one?